There are two fundamental orientations by which human consciousness relates to the world. One turns inward, the other outward. These are not mere surface behaviors, but deep psychic dispositions. One person may walk into a room and immediately begin engaging with those around them, their energy flowing outward like a river into the sea. Another may enter quietly, observing, reflecting, feeling the atmosphere before deciding whether or not to speak. These two differing modes of orientation are not matters of choice or social conditioning. They are innate structural principles of the psyche itself. One is not superior to the other, for both are essential and rooted in the nature of life. The outward, directed personality seeks the object. Their psychic energy or libido is drawn toward people, things, activity, and external events. Such individuals find nourishment in interaction, action, and involvement. Their thoughts take shape in conversation, their ideas are inspired by the world around them, and their sense of reality is affirmed by contact with others. They do not lose themselves in the object. They live through it. They become more themselves by engaging with it. They are the builders of cities, the catalysts in group movement, the first to speak, to risk, to act. Their confidence arises from their resonance with the surrounding world. By contrast, the inward, directed personality lives by what arises within. The introverted individual turns the flow of energy toward the subject, the internal world of thought, feeling, intuition, and imagination. Such people do not seek reality in things, but in meanings. They are not necessarily shy or antisocial, but their strength lies in solitude, in reflection, in a dialogue with the unseen. Their sense of truth is inwardly verified. They may hesitate before acting because they must first consult the quiet voice within. These are the philosophers, poets, mystics, and deep thinkers, not because of career or preference, but because their center of gravity is internal. It is essential to understand that introversion and extraversion are not about behavior in the casual sense. A person who speaks often may still be introverted, just as one who is quiet may be extroverted. The distinction lies in where the individual's libido, their vital energy, is naturally directed. To the extrovert, life gains meaning through the outer world. To the introvert, meaning is discovered inwardly and then cautiously brought forth. Yet neither type exists in absolute purity. In every person, both orientations are present. Just as we breathe in and out, day turns to night, and the heart expands and contracts. What we call the attitude is a predominance, a tendency. One may live predominantly extroverted, but in times of stress or change, the introverted side may rise up and demand attention. The same is true in reverse. The challenge and the opportunity lies in recognizing this polarity within oneself and in learning to honor both sides. A danger arises when one attitude suppresses or devalues the other. The extrovert may lose touch with inner depth, become overextended, shaped entirely by external demands, and eventually feel hollow, as though their own soul were a stranger. The introvert may become too withdrawn, too wrapped in internal content, and risk isolation, fantasy, or loss of grounding in the real world. In each case, there is a price for imbalance. The world often favors the extrovert. The pace of modern life, its noise and speed, rewards outward performance and quick response. But beneath the surface of every era, the introverted spirit works silently, shaping ideas, crafting symbols, discerning patterns that may guide humanity. One type speaks the language of action, the other of insight, and both are needed equally and fully. There is also a rhythm to life in which each attitude may dominate at different times. The child may begin life in a highly extroverted state, exploring the world, touching, tasting, experimenting, But in adolescence, as identity forms, the introverted attitude often strengthens. One begins to question, to reflect, to withdraw, and redefine. In midlife, the neglected attitude may assert itself with force. The active extrovert may suddenly feel empty and be drawn to spirituality, therapy, or solitude. The reflective introvert may find they can no longer remain in the shadows, but must act, speak, or lead. In this way, life urges us toward wholeness, pushing the soul to develop what was dormant. Understanding one's natural orientation is not a limitation, it is a foundation. It tells you how you best recharge, how you best grow, and where your blind spots may lie. The extrovert must learn to pause, to wait, to listen to the voice that whispers rather than shouts. The introvert must learn to risk exposure, to bring their inner treasures into the shared world. Each must move toward the other, not to become what they are not, but to become more of what they truly are. This inner dynamic is not a box to contain the self, but a mirror that reflects it. Knowing whether your psyche leans toward the object or the subject is a step toward self-realization. It is the beginning of a long and rich dialogue within, between the seen and the unseen, the spoken and the felt, the outer journey and the inner truth. Within the structure of the human psyche lie four distinct yet interrelated functions through which we come to know the world and make our way within it. These functions are not merely mental habits or learned behaviors. They are innate mechanisms, psychic tools granted to every individual. They form the core means by which consciousness interacts with both external reality and the inner landscape of the soul. Every person relies upon these functions in some form, yet each individual favors certain ones over others, shaping personality, world view, and approach to life itself. The first pair of functions pertains to how we perceive reality, how information is received and impressions are formed. These are sensation and intuition. The second pair deals with judgment, how decisions are made and values are assigned. These are thinking and feeling. Together, these four functions represent the basic scaffolding of human consciousness, and each offers its own path to understanding, its own way of being in the world. Sensation is rooted in the present moment. It is the function that allows a person to register the concrete details of the environment. It is through sensation that we become aware of what is, what can be seen, touched, heard, tasted, and smelled. The sensation type trusts what is directly experienced and values what is actual, real, and reliable. The sun on the skin, the smell of coffee, the texture of a stone, these are not mere data points but meaningful aspects of existence. For someone who leads with sensation, life must be tangible. They anchor themselves in reality by attending closely to the physical world. They are often grounded, practical, and oriented to the now. Yet their shadow may be a tendency to miss deeper meanings, to resist abstraction, or to become trapped in routine and what is known. In contrast, intuition is a function that bypasses the physical senses and leaps toward what might be. It perceives patterns, possibilities, connections not yet realized. Where sensation observes, intuition intuits. It grasps the whole from a fragment, sensing what lies beneath or beyond the immediate. The intuitive type often moves with instinctual certainty toward future outcomes, symbolic meanings, or ideas not yet fully formed. Their reality is a living tapestry of implications and potential. They often act before full evidence appears, guided by an inner sense of direction. This can make them visionary, creative, and deeply insightful. Yet they may overlook the facts before them, neglect the practical, or lose themselves in abstraction. The perceiving functions, sensation and intuition, are both necessary. One allows for deep contact with the world as it is. The other opens the door to what could be. One is a realist, the other a dreamer. and each of us carries both within, though in different proportions. The task of development is not to become all things at once, but to understand how these functions serve and sometimes conflict with one another, and to begin weaving them into a more complete whole. While perception gathers information, judgment gives it meaning and direction. The judging functions are thinking and feeling, and they represent two distinct ways of evaluating experience. Thinking seeks objective truth. It organizes, categorizes, defines. It relies on principles, structures, logic, and systems. To the thinking type, clarity is a virtue, consistency is essential, and decisions must be based on impersonal criteria. A situation is examined not in terms of who it affects emotionally, but by what makes sense, what fits within a logical framework. Such individuals may be perceived as detached or analytical, but their goal is not to ignore the human element. It is to ensure that decisions are just, fair, and coherent. Feeling, by contrast, evaluates based on personal and interpersonal values. It asks what matters, who is affected, and what harmonizes with the inner truth of the person or group. It does not equate to emotion, though it may be closely linked. Feeling is a rational function, but its reasoning is value-driven rather than logic-driven. A person leading with feeling will often make choices based on empathy, ethics, or the emotional tenor of a situation. Their concern is not only whether something is true, but whether it is right, meaningful, or kind. They are often warm, considerate, and sensitive to others. But their challenge may lie in avoiding overly subjective judgments, or in being swayed by emotional context rather than universal standards. Just as no person relies solely on one mode of perception, no person judges only with logic or only with feeling. Both are present, yet one tends to dominate, and herein lies the core of personal conflict and growth. A person overly reliant on thinking may find themselves distant from human connection. A person overly centered in feeling may struggle with consistency or with making difficult, objective decisions. Growth arises when the neglected function is recognized, honored, and slowly integrated, not as a betrayal of one's nature, but as its expansion. These four functions operate in a hierarchy. One is dominant, the main way a person engages the world. A second auxiliary function supports the dominant, offering balance. The third and fourth, tertiary and inferior, lie further in the unconscious. They may emerge in dreams, in stress, or in midlife, when the psyche begins to demand a fuller expression of itself. The inferior function is especially powerful, for it represents not weakness, but potential. It is the hidden key to becoming more than one has been. Thus, each individual has a unique configuration of these functions. Some see the world through intuition and decide through thinking. Others perceive through sensation and judge through feeling. These combinations define not only personality types, but entire worldviews. The scientist and the artist, the reformer and the caretaker, the builder and the visionary, each reflects a particular ordering of these inner tools. But these are not boxes to confine a person. They are paths toward awareness. They reveal that there is no single right way to think, feel, sense, or intuit. Each function has its wisdom and each its shadow. To know oneself is to know which of these functions speaks loudest and which whispers from the dark. And from this knowledge one can begin the true work, not to perfect a single function, but to learn the language of all four, and in doing so, come closer to the truth of the whole cell. If there are two great divisions within the human psyche's activity, perceiving and judging. These represent not only opposing movements of consciousness, but also distinct ways of engaging with the world and the self. To perceive is to take in, to observe, to allow reality to present itself. To judge is to evaluate, to decide, to assign meaning or direction. These two functions are not in conflict but in rhythm, each necessary, each dependent on the other. Just as the eye sees and the hand grasps, the mind must both observe and choose. Within each person, these capacities are at work continuously, often unconsciously, shaping the unfolding of experience and the formation of personality. Perceiving functions are concerned with gathering information. They make no attempt to interpret or judge the content. They simply experience. These functions are sensation and intuition. Sensation attends to what is present, what is tangible, what is verifiable through the senses. It grounds the psyche in the here and now, in the body, in the physical world. Intuition, by contrast, skips the surface and seeks the invisible pattern, the possibility, the symbolic meaning hidden within or beyond the data. Where sensation wants the facts, intuition wants the meaning behind the facts. Yet both functions serve the same essential role, to bring reality into the field of consciousness. They are receptive, open, uncritical, concerned not with what should be done, but with what is or what could be. These perceiving functions are often overlooked or undervalued in a world obsessed with judgment. People are taught to act, to decide, to produce outcomes, but without perception, judgment becomes blind. Decisions made without awareness are mechanical at best, destructive at worst. The perceiving functions slow down the rush to conclusion. They say, look again, notice more, feel the moment, sense the future. They ask nothing except presence, and from that presence arises a fuller image of reality. In contrast, judging functions are concerned with interpretation, choice, and action. They bring form to the chaos of perception. Thinking evaluates according to logic, structure, objective principles. It wants to know what is correct, what is consistent, what is rational. Feeling evaluates according to values, harmony, subjective meaning. It seeks to know what matters, what feels right, what sustains inner or interpersonal balance. These functions do not merely react, they organize, they make sense of experience. Where perception gathers the pieces of the puzzle, judgment assembles them into a coherent picture and decides what to do with it. Judging functions tend to dominate the external expressions of personality. They are more obvious, more visible, more tied to action. A person who leads with thinking may appear decisive, analytical, and systematic. One who leads with feeling may appear compassionate, empathetic, and value-driven. But both are judging functions, even if their orientation differs. Both have a tendency to close the loop, to resolve uncertainty, to bring matters to a conclusion. Yet herein lies a potential danger. The judging functions, when overemphasized, can lead to premature decisions, rigidity, or an intolerance of ambiguity. They crave order, and sometimes they impose it before all the facts are known. The balance between perceiving and judging is critical in the development of the whole personality. Too much perception without judgment can result in indecision, aimlessness, or a detachment from practical concerns. The person becomes a passive observer of life, rich in experience but lacking in direction. Too much judgment without perception leads to dogmatism, tunnel vision, and an inability to adapt. The person acts decisively, but from an incomplete understanding. Wisdom lies in the integration of both, to see clearly and then to act wisely. The interplay of these functions is not static. Each person has a dominant function, often either a perceiving or a judging one, that colors their entire experience. The auxiliary function, usually from the opposite category, provides balance. If a person leads with intuition, for instance, they may support it with thinking to organize their insights. If another leads with feeling, they may rely on sensation to stay grounded in the present. This pairing creates a dynamic inner tension, a backhand, forth between gathering and deciding, receiving and shaping. The remaining two functions lie deeper in the unconscious and emerge later in life or under conditions of stress or transformation. This hierarchy is not a prison but a path. It shows that each individual is not a finished product but a becoming, a gradual unfolding of awareness and integration. The dominant function is often highly developed early in life and becomes a source of confidence and identity, but the neglected functions, especially those from the opposing category, remain in shadow. For example, a strong thinker may mistrust feelings, dismissing them as irrational or weak. A deeply intuitive person may ignore sensory detail, living in a world of abstraction. It is only by recognizing and honoring the inferior functions, especially the one from the opposing category, that one begins to grow in depth and wholeness. In many ways, the dance between perceiving and judging mirrors the larger dance of existence. Life itself offers perceptions, a landscape of impressions, images, signs, and possibilities. The human response is to judge, to assign meaning, to make choices, to move forward. But these movements are not meant to be fixed. They flow in cycles, in spirals. Perception leads to judgment, and judgment creates new perceptions. One listens, then speaks. One gathers, then acts. The most fully developed individuals are those who have learned this rhythm and do not resist it. They can wait without passivity and act without haste. They can hold ambiguity without fear and still move forward with clarity. To understand the difference between perceiving and judging functions is not simply to categorize oneself or others. It is to enter into a deeper awareness of how the psyche works, how it perceives, processes, and participates in the unfolding of life. It is to recognize that perception without judgment is incomplete, and judgment without perception is dangerous. The goal is not balance for its own sake, but harmony in the service of truth. Only when both sides are heard can the soul begin to speak in its full voice. Within each individual lies a unique psychological architecture, a system of inner operations that determines not only how one thinks and feels, but how one sees, interprets, and responds to the world. This system is not flat or random, it is hierarchical among the four core psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. There exists a natural order, a ranking that unfolds as personality develops. Each person possesses all four functions, yet one stands above the rest as the dominant, the most conscious and consistently used. Beneath it lies the auxiliary, a supportive function that balances the dominant. Below these two, the tertiary and inferior functions operate in subtler, often unconscious ways. This vertical arrangement of functions, known as the function hierarchy, shapes how an individual experiences life, interacts with others, and journeys toward psychological wholeness. The dominant function sits at the throne of consciousness. It is the strongest, most differentiated aspect of one's psyche. It determines not only how a person views reality, but also serves as their most reliable means of navigating it. If thinking is dominant, logic and structure define the world. If feeling is dominant, values and emotional resonance dictate choices. If sensation leads, facts and tangible experience rule. If intuition governs, possibilities and unseen connections guide the way. The dominant function becomes second nature. Its operations are so familiar, so consistent, that a person often assumes everyone else sees the world the same way. It becomes a lens through which reality itself is perceived, and its development begins early in life. The auxiliary function plays a crucial balancing role. It typically comes from the opposite domain. If the dominant function is a judging function like thinking or feeling, the auxiliary will often be a perceiving function like sensation or intuition, and vice versa. This opposing nature serves to keep the psyche from becoming lopsided or overly narrow. For example, an individual whose dominant function is intuition might have sensation as an auxiliary to ensure they remain grounded in reality, even as they navigate visions of the future. The auxiliary function is not as strong or natural as the dominant, but it is accessible and supportive. It represents a more conscious attempt to develop a counterbalance, to compensate for the one-sidedness of the dominant function. It often emerges in adolescence or early adulthood as the personality begins to mature and broaden. Beneath these two functions lies the tertiary, a quieter and often less developed part of the psyche. It is usually the opposite of the auxiliary function in orientation. If one's auxiliary function is feeling, the tertiary might be thinking, and vice versa. The tertiary does not emerge fully until later in life, and its influence is often subtle, appearing in moments of play, creativity, or introspection. In youth, it may be immature or misused, but with attention and time, it can become a valuable part of the inner landscape. It provides an opportunity for deeper self-awareness and complexity, though it rarely becomes as reliable or well integrated as the dominant and auxiliary functions. At the base of the hierarchy lies the inferior function, and here is where much of the mystery and transformative potential of the psyche resides. The inferior function is the least developed, the most unconscious, and often the most problematic aspect of personality. It represents the psychic opposite of the dominant function. For a dominant thinker, feeling is the inferior. For a dominant intuitive, sensation is buried deep below. This function is not weak in power, it is weak in integration. In fact, it often emerges in dreams, projections, compulsions, or moments of emotional overwhelm. It carries immense energy, and because it is unconscious, it frequently influences behavior without the individual realizing it. The inferior function is both a source of tension and a doorway to growth. Because it lies in shadow, it often becomes the site of personal blind spots, complexes, or irrational fears. Yet it also contains the key to wholeness. By confronting and working with the inferior function, a person begins the journey toward individuation, a deepening and broadening of the self beyond the habitual ego. This confrontation is not easy. It involves facing discomfort, contradiction, and vulnerability. The inferior function resists conscious control, and it tends to emerge at moments of crisis, transition, or transformation. But when acknowledged and explored, it can unlock creative potential, empathy, or realism that the dominant function alone could never provide. This hierarchy is not fixed in time, it evolves with life. The early years are ruled by the dominant function. As one grows, the auxiliary comes online, bringing stability and balance. The tertiary may awaken in midlife, especially during periods of reflection or change. The inferior function tends to assert itself dramatically in times of psychological upheaval, what some call a midlife crisis. But it can also slowly be integrated through conscious work, dream analysis, or exposure to opposing perspectives. The hierarchy is thus not a static structure, but a developed mental process unfolding through experience, relationship, and introspection. Understanding this hierarchy offers more than self-description, it provides a map of growth. It reveals why certain activities energize and others exhaust, why some challenges feel natural while others seem insurmountable. It explains the strange dynamic of inner conflict, why a person may be brilliant in one area and blind in another. More importantly, it points the way toward becoming more than one's habitual self. When the functions begin to work in concert, when the inferior is no longer rejected but welcomed, when the neglected functions are no longer feared but explored, something profound begins to happen. The personality becomes more fluid, more adaptive, more whole. Each function in the hierarchy has its voice, its gifts, its limitations. None is unnecessary, and none is absolute. They form a psychic symphony, each playing a part in the unfolding story of who a person is and who they are becoming. The journey is not toward perfection, but toward integration, not toward control, but toward a deepening of awareness. In that journey, the hierarchy becomes not a chain of command, but a guide, a living structure within the soul that points always toward a fuller realization of the self. Human development is not a straight line, but a spiraling movement toward inner unity. It begins with a narrow sense of identity, a reliance on one dominant perspective or psychological function, and gradually unfolds into a more nuanced awareness of the self as complex, multifaceted, and contradictory. This unfolding is not accidental. It is a process of integration, the conscious and unconscious assimilation of neglected or inferior parts of the personality into the whole. True growth is not about becoming more efficient at what already comes naturally, but about turning inward to acknowledge what has been left behind, suppressed, or dismissed. It is the journey of transformation through the acceptance and integration of the full range of one's psychic functions. Every individual starts life with a dominant function, the one most natural and accessible. It becomes the foundation of identity and confidence, the go-to way of dealing with the world. Whether this function is thinking, feeling, sensation, or intuition, it is developed early and becomes highly differentiated. A person comes to rely on it instinctively, drawing from it in every interaction, decision, and self-concept. Yet this very dominance creates imbalance. The functions not favored become underdeveloped, unconscious, and often misjudged. The psyche begins its life divided, not because of failure, but because of necessity. Consciousness cannot emerge all at once. It must focus, specialize, and then gradually widen. Integration begins when a person becomes aware of the limitations of their primary function. This often comes through conflict, inner dissatisfaction, failed relationships, unexplainable anxiety, or the sudden collapse of what once worked flawlessly. The dominant function no longer suffices. It solves problems in one way, but the problems have changed. The soul begins to whisper from its hidden chambers. Other functions stir, revealing new possibilities, but also new discomforts. What was unconscious demands attention. Growth requires a descent into these unknown parts of the psyche, not to abandon the dominant, but to broaden the personality through inclusion. The auxiliary function offers the first bridge toward balance. It is not the opposite of the dominant, but its complement, often from the opposing domain of judging or perceiving. If the dominant is thinking, the auxiliary may be intuition or sensation. If the dominant is feeling, the auxiliary may be intuition or sensation as well, depending on the personality structure. The auxiliary provides support and stabilization, countering the excesses of the dominant function. It helps prevent rigidity, offering an alternate route to problem solving and understanding. As it becomes more consciously developed, the personality gains depth and flexibility. The person learns to see in more than one dimension, to hold competing truths without immediate resolution. Yet true growth does not stop with balance between two functions. The deeper work lies in confronting the tertiary and especially the inferior function. These parts of the psyche are not simply weak, they are foreign. They speak a language the ego does not understand. The tertiary function may emerge playfully at first, in moments of creativity or relaxation. It tends to lack discipline, but it also holds the potential for delight and spontaneous wisdom. With time and intention, it can mature and begin to inform decisions in a more conscious way. The inferior function, however, poses the greatest challenge and the greatest promise. It is the function least developed, least trusted, and most often projected onto others. For the dominant thinker, it is feeling, often dismissed as irrational or weak. For the dominant sensor, it is intuition, regarded as unreliable or unfounded. And yet, this inferior function holds the key to wholeness. It carries the energy of the unconscious and often emerges in moments of stress, crisis, or profound change. Dreams, fantasies, emotional outbursts, or unexpected attractions may all be expressions of the inferior function trying to make itself known. Integrating the inferior function is not a task of control but of relationship. One does not master it as one does the dominant function. Instead, one must listen, engage, and slowly bring it into the light of awareness. This may require confronting long-held fears, questioning one's self-image, or developing skills that feel unnatural. It is a process of humbling and of healing. The inferior function is not simply a weakness. It is a portal to the unconscious, a wellspring of creativity, compassion, and insight that cannot be accessed by the ego alone. As the neglected functions are integrated, the personality becomes more whole. Internal conflicts begin to resolve not by elimination, but by inclusion. The self is no longer defined by a single mode of being, but by the interplay of multiple perspectives. This leads to a more authentic way of living, not one dictated by habit or unconscious defense, but one grounded in awareness, freedom, and choice. The integrated personality can hold tension without collapse, respond with nuance instead of reflex, and act with greater congruence between inner truth and outer behavior. This process of integration is lifelong. It does not happen in a single moment or even through mere will. It unfolds through experience, reflection, challenge, and support. It often deepens in the second half of life, when external goals give way to internal questions. The drive to succeed or conform may soften, giving rise to the deeper desire to understand oneself and become whole. This inner journey is not linear, nor is it without pain, but it is the most meaningful journey one can undertake, the gradual becoming of who one truly is. Each step toward integration brings greater alignment between thought and feeling, between what is sensed and what is imagined, between action and meaning. It allows the individual to relate to others with empathy, to adapt without losing core identity, and to find purpose not in perfection, but in participation with the fullness of life. This is growth through integration, the movement from one-sidedness to wholeness, from surface to depth, from separation to unity. The human personality is not a fixed type, but a living system, capable of transformation through the conscious embrace of its total nature. Within the deep structure of the human psyche lies a system of functions and attitudes that vary from one individual to another, creating a vast spectrum of personality expressions. Some people are driven by the clarity of logic, others by the richness of feeling. Some rely on what they can see and touch, others are guided by subtle patterns and inner visions. These differences are not accidental. They are essential expressions of human diversity. Each type represents a distinct way of seeing and interacting with the world, shaped by the dominance of certain psychological functions. And yet, in the face of this diversity, a mistaken tendency often arises: the desire to rank one type above another, to declare one way of thinking, one style of living, one orientation of consciousness as superior. But the truth, as revealed through deep psychological insight, is that there is no better type. The world is not a machine that requires only one kind of tool. It is a complex, living system that thrives on balance and variety. In this system, every psychological type has a role to play. The thinking type, with their commitment to logic and structure, brings clarity and order. The feeling type, attuned to human values and emotional harmony, sustains relationships and ethics. The sensation type, grounded in the tangible and real, ensures that life remains connected to what is present. The intuitive type, always reaching beyond the immediate, imagines possibilities and reveals new directions. None of these approaches is more valuable than the others. They are all essential, not only to society, but to the inner ecology of the human soul. Yet it is common to see certain types elevated in specific contexts. In environments that prize efficiency, rationality, and control, thinking types may be seen as the ideal. In cultures that emphasize empathy, emotional intelligence, or community, feeling types may rise to prominence. Sensation may be favored in practical fields, intuition in creative or spiritual ones, but these preferences are not statements of truth. They are reflections of cultural bias or situational need. The truth lies deeper. Every type, in its mature form, contributes uniquely and indispensably. The idea of a better type dissolves when one begins to understand what each function truly offers. This misunderstanding often begins early in life. Children are socialized into environments that reward specific traits. A highly intuitive child in a sensation-driven family may be told to stop dreaming and focus on the facts. A sensitive feeling child in a thinking-oriented school may be seen as weak or overly emotional. Over time, this kind of reinforcement teaches people not only to mistrust their own nature, but to see other types as more competent, more normal, more worthy. This creates an internal split, a denial of one's authentic function, and a longing to become something else. But no person can flourish by becoming a poor copy of another type. Growth only begins when one accepts the value of who they truly are. Every function has its strength and its shadow. Thinking, for example, can become rigid and disconnected from human warmth when it lacks feeling. Feeling can turn into sentimentality or moralism when not grounded by thinking. Sensation can become stuck in routines and blind to meaning without the balance of intuition. Intuition without sensation can lose contact with reality and drift into fantasy. In this way, every type has a natural limitation that is not a flaw, but an invitation to balance. It is not that one type is better, it is that no type is complete on its own. Each needs the others, internally and socially, to become whole. When individuals understand that their type is not superior or inferior, but simply one aspect of a vast human tapestry, they begin to see others differently as well. The tendency to judge, to dismiss, or to compete gives way to curiosity and respect. The thinker no longer sees the feeler as irrational, but as someone who accesses a different kind of truth. The sensor does not view the intuitive as impractical, but as one who sees the horizon before others do. This shift in perception fosters deeper relationships and a richer sense of community, as people learn not only to tolerate, but to value each other's differences. Even within the self, this awareness fosters healing. It allows individuals to stop striving to be someone they are not, and to begin nurturing the gifts they already possess. It opens the door to exploring the less developed parts of their psyche. not as deficiencies to correct, but as dimensions to embrace. This is the essence of psychological maturity, not conformity to an ideal, but integration of the self. When a person leaves from this place, they radiate authenticity, not because they are perfect, but because they are whole. Moreover, no type guarantees happiness, success, or wisdom. A person may be a brilliant thinker and still suffer from emotional emptiness. Another may be deeply in tune with their feelings but struggle to make decisions. Life's challenges do not discriminate by type, and no type has a monopoly on truth or fulfillment. What matters is not which function comes first, but how well each person learns to live with their type consciously, responsibly, and with openness to growth. Every function, when developed, can become a source of wisdom. Every type, when lived authentically, can become a vehicle for meaning. The greatest deception is to believe that we must become someone else to be whole. The deepest truth is that our type, with all its gifts and limitations, is the starting point for a lifelong journey of becoming. When that truth is accepted, a quiet confidence emerges, not the arrogance of superiority, but the strength of inner alignment. One no longer looks outward for validation, but inward for integration, and in doing so, one becomes not a better type, but a fuller human being.